everyone. This is Professor Hall, and today we are going to be talking about Rebecca. I think the font on this book cover is a little ridiculous, but I love the gothic feel of the shadow on the staircase, like the ghost of Rebecca kind of watching over everything that's going on. So this is the first of the series of lectures on Rebecca, and today we're going to do a brief summary of the first part of the book. And the reason for that is that I don't want you to have any spoilers. So if you saw the lecture on Jane Eyre, I said basically kind of the same thing. Both of these are books with a component of a mystery, and I don't want you to look up anything about the book. I'm giving you a summary just so that you can kind of understand the context of the novel, what to expect in the beginning when you first start reading it. But again, the novel is part mystery, so if you try to read a full summary online, you will ruin that mystery. You won't enjoy the book as much, and I really want you to discover the story for the first time. Also, don't look up anything about the movie. It has a different, some different plot points from the book. But similarly, you won't like reading the book as much because you'll know what to expect and it won't be as much fun. So anyway, let's get started. Monte Carlo and Italy. So these are pictures of Monte Carlo about that time. So you have kind of an idea of where the book starts. This is the casino and resort at Monte Carlo today. This is the grand entrance. And that's a still from a movie called Monte Carlo. So you kind of have an idea of what the people would have looked like at the time. That movie came out just a couple of years before this book was written. So in the 1930s. So we start in the present, at least the present of the novel, which it was written in 1938. Some people place it in 1938. I tend to place it a little bit earlier because by 1938, in places like Monte Carlo and Italy and Britain, where most of the story takes place, we already have a lot of the tensions leading up to World War II. So if anything, the book might start in 1938, but I think the bulk of the action takes place a little bit earlier. So the unnamed narrator, we never know her name through the whole story, she's describing a dream that she had of Manderley, an estate where she used to live. So the book starts off with one of the most famous first lines in literature, "Last night I dreamt of Manderley again." And then we flash back to how this story starts. The narrator is working as a lady's companion. This would have been not unlike the position of governess, not quite a servant, but not one of acceptable high social standing either. So someone who was lower middle class but well educated would possibly take a position first. It started out as ladies in waiting in medieval times, lesser nobles who would accompany people who had a higher noble rank and would play music with them and tell stories and sing songs and those kind of things. So later, it is actually a job that you can still get, but typically it's for someone who's quite elderly, to be a companion and a friend to them rather than, and do a few things maybe around the house rather than having them go into a nursing home or having them have an actual nurse in the home, right? So at any rate, that's what she's employed as. And she has this wealthy busybody employer, Mrs. Van Hopper, who has brought her to Monte Carlo. This is where Mrs. Van Hopper enjoys spending her leisure days, and it was a place of opulence for the wealthy elite to go and have their leisure time. So playing tennis, bathing was what they would have called swimming, going to the casino, going out to eat, those kind of things. And the narrator meets and falls in love with the dashing Maxim de Winter. He's about 20 years older than her, and he's far above her in social class. So he is one of these elite at this resort, and her employer wants to talk to him because he has this beautiful estate, and it's quite well known, so well known that people take tours there. She informs the girl that Maxim never got over the death of his wife Rebecca, who drowned only 9 months before. So he's not even a widower for a full year when he meets our narrator. But they start secretly spending time together. And when Mrs. Van Hopper decides that Monte Carlo has become boring to her and now she's going to travel someplace else, Maxim doesn't want the narrator to go with her, and so he proposes to her. They marry very quickly, and then they leave for their honeymoon in Italy. And we'll talk about the symbolism of these places later on in the next lecture. So then we have Manderley. This is Manderley estate, the estate that inspired the author to write about Manderley. After honeymooning in Italy, the lovers come to Manderley, Maxim's very large estate. So you can kind of see it's like a mansion or almost a small castle, right? A lot of land, and people tour a portion of the house while they live in the other portion because it's quite a famous house. But here, the troubles begin. So the house is beautiful in the daytime, but it's almost as if Rebecca, Maxim's first wife, it's almost as if her ghost is haunting the new Mrs. De Winter. And Rebecca's presence is further felt in the dour, commanding Mrs. Danvers. Mrs. Danvers is the head housekeeper who essentially runs most of daily life at Manderley. She's quite severe and not kind to our narrator. And the tension between them is kind of the same as the tension that the narrator feels over the fact that she doesn't seem to quite live up to Maxim's first wife, or the memory of his first wife. The second Mrs. De Winter is only 21. She was an orphan. If you think that this is a little bit like Jane Eyre, you're right. We'll talk more about that later on as well. But she wasn't brought up in this society, so she feels completely out of her depth, and it makes her quite insecure. With Maxim appreciated her innocence, the fact that she was younger and she is kind, but he doesn't seem to understand quite how socially awkward she is. So there are things that happen, and he's like, well, why didn't you just do this? And she's kind of like, I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what I could do that, right? She has really almost no power in this situation. He becomes kind of angry when she's unable to run the estate properly as his former wife did. And so as his affections retreat, the new Mrs. De Winter becomes more and more obsessed and haunted by Rebecca's memory. So this is a novel about jealousy. She is jealous about Rebecca and sort of envies her and wishes she could be more like her and feels really inadequate. Mrs. Danvers almost seems to be mentally torturing her, reminding her at every step that she is not Rebecca and she will never be good enough. And Manderley, a place that was sort of going to represent beauty and hope and a new life, becomes dark and strange and this gothic landscape. So some people have called this book a romance, and other people have called it psychological thriller, because it really is fully taking place from the narrator's point of view, and we see every thought, every anxiety, every worry and concern that she has. These are stills from the movie, but you can see, even though there are some big differences, the acting is amazing. It won Best Picture. It's the only Alfred Hitchcock film to win Best Picture. But here she's looking at Rebecca's things, and you can see Mrs. Danvers here in the black. There we go. And then here she's worried and crying, and Mrs. Danvers is kind of edging her on right up close to her ear, right? So you can see that dynamic of power and no power. So the book kind of explores the darker side of marriage, things to expect when dating a widower. I picked this picture because, it's like a man and his new girlfriend or new wife, and there's a physical wall between them, and that's kind of what's been happening in the book. Yeah. This is from, this is actually, it looks like a book cover, but it's a picture from the BBC version of the book, which was done in the 1970s. But you can kind of see, right, her plainness. And Vivian Leigh was not in the movie. We never see what Rebecca looks like, but that's kind of how I always picture her. So this very plain, ordinary young girl of low social class, and comparing herself to this like great, elegant beauty. So the narrator is longing for Maxim's attentions, but they seem only to argue or ignore each other. They're never on the same page. Without any work, she has really little to do but walk and sketch and wonder about his feelings. So like Jane Eyre, she sketches a little bit, but as we go on, she becomes more and more insecure, and even those things she can't really do. And you can kind of see that this change of social class, she's not used to it. So at one point they talk about, there's a group of aristocrats, and they're all sort of talking about like, well, I do such and such, and I do such and such. And they ask her, like, do you ride? Do you ride horses? Do you play polo? Do you have any sort of exercise or fun, like playing tennis or golf or, sailing, things of that nature? And she's not used to having that leisure time. So she really doesn't quite know what to do with herself. And she gets more and more in her head. And like Rochester and Jane Eyre, Maxim is a man of secrets. So she's just obsessing about his feelings. What was his past really like? Is he hiding something from her? She has some help in the form of Maxim's sister Beatrice and his estate manager Frank Crawley, who runs everything that Mrs. Danvers doesn't. But very often she is alone, seeing Rebecca's ghost in every room of the house and becoming more jealous of her and comparing herself to Rebecca's memory. So that's it. That's as far as I'm going to go. Don't spoil the book for yourself. But you can see this kind of in the first third of the book, and then it develops further and other things happen. So it gets quite interesting and exciting. All right, here's our excerpt. When a cloud came over the moon like a dark hand across a face, the memories left me. I looked again at an empty shell with no whisper of the past about its staring walls. Our fear and suffering were gone now. When I thought of Manderley in my waking hours, I would not be bitter. I would not think of it as it might have been if I could have lived there without fear. I would remember the rose garden in summer, the birds that sang their tea under the trees, and the sound of the sea coming up to us from the shore below. I would think of the flowers blown from the bushes and the happy valley. These things could never lose their freshness. So this is just from the first chapter, but you can kind of see the Gothic tone that is in this book. The cloud coming over the moon like a dark hand across a face. The empty shell and the staring walls, and then that dual nature, that pairing that we often see in Gothic stories. In comparison, we have tea time under the trees and the beautiful sound of the sea and the rose garden and the birds, right? All of those things. The happy valley versus the dark memory. So I am looking forward to talking more about this book. The next lecture also does not have spoilers, and that is a few things to know about the novel. So I look forward to sharing those with you, and then later on seeing your thoughts about the book. Thanks.